Human was sleeping with his tool out when I came into his room. Lyra had always heard strange things about humans, but she never thought she would be caught off guard by them. She had traveled across many planets, interacted with countless alien species, and had even spent time observing the Kithians' allies. But nothing could have prepared her for her first encounter with a human. The station she was assigned to was massive, an orbiting city in the farthest reaches of known space. It was home to hundreds of different species, all cooperating, trading, and learning from one another. As a young diplomat for the Kithians, Lyra's mission was to observe and report on the humans, an up-and-coming species that seemed to have a unique way of living, one that intrigued and confused her people. The humans had only recently established colonies on distant planets, and though their technology was advanced, they were still seen as rough around the edges. The Kithians, with their sophisticated, organized approach to everything, had trouble understanding how these humans survived and thrived in the vastness of space. Lyra's task was simple: observe, learn, and report back to her people. Her first day on the space station had been filled with formal meetings, discussions, and introductions to the various species aboard. But now, she found herself needing to conduct an in-depth observation of a human's personal space, their living quarters. It was an important part of understanding their culture, how they lived when they thought no one was watching. As Lyra stood before the door to Enzo's quarters, she adjusted the small device in her hand. It was a simple tool used to unlock the door, a standard part of the station's security system. But as the door slid open with a soft hiss, Lyra felt an unexpected jolt of anticipation. She wasn't sure why. After all, she had studied humans extensively. But this was different. This was personal. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. The first thing she noticed was how cluttered it seemed. There were wires and gadgets strewn about, some half-assembled, others left in a state of disarray. A large desk in the corner was covered with blueprints, and what looked like blueprints for new technology. She'd heard that humans were brilliant engineers, but their methods of work appeared chaotic, even messy. And then her gaze fell upon the figure in the bed. Enzo, she presumed. He was asleep as far as she could tell, but it wasn't just the fact that he was asleep that caught her attention, it was the way he was positioned. His body lay sprawled across the bed, his face relaxed in peaceful slumber, and beside him on the bed was his tool. Lyra's eyes widened in confusion as she took in the sight. It was just a tool, of course, but the placement of it, lying next to him on the bed, was something she hadn't expected. The tool was a sleek, high-tech device, its silver surface glistening in the soft light. She had seen it used before in the engineering bays, mostly for repairing machinery and building things. But this was different. It seemed out of place here, in a place that was clearly meant for rest. Lyra blinked and quickly turned away, her heart racing. She was a diplomat trained to observe and understand. She had been taught not to judge. But the sight of Enzo lying there with his tool beside him was a moment of shock. She had never seen such behavior before. She stood frozen for a few moments, unsure what to do. The logical thing would be to leave the room, to move on to the next part of her assignment. But something kept her there. She didn't know why, but she felt compelled to stay. She took a quiet step backward, trying to exit the room without making a sound. But as she did, she accidentally bumped into a small piece of equipment on the floor. The quiet clink echoed through the otherwise silent room. Enzo stirred. Lyra froze, holding her breath, praying he wouldn't wake up. But it was too late. Enzo's eyes fluttered open and he blinked a few times, clearly confused by the unfamiliar presence in his room. Hey," he said, his voice groggy from sleep. He sat up quickly, rubbing his eyes. Didn't expect a visitor this early. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't planned for this moment. She had assumed she would simply observe from afar, not interact. But now that Enzo was awake, she had to think quickly. I'm sorry, Lyra stammered. I didn't mean to disturb you. I'm Lyra. I'm just observing. I'm from the Kithian delegation. Enzo blinked again, clearly processing the words but not fully awake yet. He glanced at the bed and then down at the tool resting next to him. Ah, he said with a sleepy smile. That thing, don't worry about it. It's just my tool. I keep it close in case I need it. You know, for repairs and stuff. Lyra felt her cheeks heat up. She had no doubt that it was a tool, but the way Enzo spoke about it made it seem so casual. He didn't seem at all embarrassed by the situation. It was almost as if he didn't even realize how unusual the sight might be for someone from another species. She cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. I didn't mean to intrude. I was just conducting a routine observation. No need to apologize, Enzo interrupted with a yawn, stretching his arms over his head. I'm sure you've seen worse. Humans tend to be unpredictable. Lyra could only nod, not sure how to respond. She had been trained to understand other species' customs, but this one was different. Human behavior didn't always make sense, and sometimes it seemed to contradict the rules that other species followed. There was something raw and honest about humans, something that fascinated and puzzled her at the same time. Enzo stood up and stretched, the movements casual and unhurried. Feel free to look around. You're welcome to stay, but I'll warn you, I'm not exactly a neat freak. Lyra hesitated, but then decided to take him up on his offer. She needed more information, after all. As she moved closer to the desk, she noticed the half-finished designs and scattered tools. There was a sense of creativity in the air, a kind of genius that was chaotic yet brilliant. You're an engineer, I take it? Lyra asked, trying to break the silence and learn more about the human before her. Enzo smiled. Yeah, I build things, fix things. It's what I do. Lyra observed him for a moment, noting how comfortable he seemed in his own skin. There was no self-consciousness, no anxiety. He was just being himself. It was different from the controlled, meticulous ways of her own people, the Kithians. Lyra felt a strange mix of admiration and curiosity bubbling inside her. As she examined the scattered blueprints and mechanical parts, she realized something that surprised her. Enzo wasn't just an engineer. He was someone who, like humans in general, worked in a way that couldn't be predicted. He approached problems with an unpredictability that was equal parts chaotic and ingenious. There was no structure, no set way of doing things. Instead, there was a spirit of creation, a drive to constantly adapt, to find new ways to build and fix. Lyra didn't fully understand it yet, but she was beginning to realize something important. The tool Enzo kept beside him wasn't just a gadget, it was a symbol of his approach to life. And that, she thought, was something worth learning more about. Over the next few days, Lyra spent more time with Enzo, observing him closely, trying to understand what made him, and humans in general, tick. After their first meeting, she was curious, but more than that, she was intrigued. She had expected humans to be strange, of course, but Enzo was different from what she had imagined. As a Kithian, Lyra was trained to observe and understand the behaviors of other species. Her people were calm, methodical, and highly structured. They believed that everything had its place and purpose, from the way their society was organized to the way they built their cities. They were proud of their orderliness, and their technology reflected that. Humans, however, seemed to function in a completely different way. There was no predictability in how they lived. The chaos of Enzo's room was just the beginning. Lyra couldn't help but notice how, despite the mess, he always seemed to get things done. It was as though their method of working, their approach to problems, was rooted in a kind of creativity that the Kithians didn't fully understand. Each time Lyra returned to observe him, Enzo was working on something new, fixing a piece of broken equipment, tinkering with a part of the station's navigation system, or assembling what appeared to be a new gadget. He was always using his tool, the one he had kept so close when she first entered his room. It was the same device, but each time it seemed to have a different purpose. To Lyra, it was a symbol of human adaptability, of their ability to use the same object for countless tasks. One day, as she entered his room to observe, she found Enzo in the middle of a project. His desk was covered in wires and schematics, the tool lying next to him. He was hunched over a small device, carefully attaching wires to a circuit board. He didn't notice Lyra standing in the doorway at first, so she watched him quietly. His focus was intense. His hands moved quickly but with precision. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. It was as though he had done this countless times before. He muttered to himself as he worked, occasionally pausing to look at a diagram, then continuing with an almost automatic fluidity. When he finally noticed her standing there, he looked up, surprised but not startled. "Oh, hey, Lyra, didn't see you there. You need something." Lyra hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain what she was feeling. I was just observing. You seem so focused when you work. It's different from how we do things." Enzo smiled, wiping his hands on his shirt. "Yeah, I guess we're a bit different that way. Humans tend to go with the flow, I suppose. We don't always stick to a plan, but somehow we make it work." Lyra nodded slowly, her mind processing what he said. "It's fascinating, your way of working. It's not as organized as the Kithians, but there's something more alive about it." Enzo chuckled, clearly amused. "Alive, huh? That's one way to put it. I think it's just the way we do things. We're not afraid to fail. We try and we learn and we try again." Lyra sat down on the small chair beside him, carefully studying the project he was working on. "You don't mind failing?" "Not at all," Enzo replied. "Failure's just part of the process. If you're not failing, you're not really trying hard enough, right?" Lyra blinked in surprise. She had never heard a sentiment like that from anyone before. The Kithians valued success and order above all else. Failure was something to be avoided at all costs. To hear Enzo talk about it so casually, as if it was a natural part of life, was strange to her, but also oddly reassuring. As the days went by, Lyra found herself visiting Enzo more frequently. It wasn't just because of her assignment anymore. She was genuinely curious about him, about how humans thought and worked. And every time she saw him, she was more impressed by how he approached problems. Enzo's method was completely different from the way the Kithians did things, but it worked. He made things happen, no matter how difficult the task seemed. There was a kind of magic in the way he combined creativity, persistence, and a little bit of chaos. One afternoon, Lyra found herself in the station's mess hall, sitting across from Enzo. He had invited her to join him for lunch, a simple gesture that she wasn't used to. The Kithians, for all their diplomatic skill, were often formal and reserved. But Enzo was easygoing, inviting, and unafraid of offering his friendship. "Tell me something about your people," Enzo said between bites of food. "I've heard a little, but I'm curious. What's life like for the Kithians?" Lyra paused for a moment, considering the question. "Life is structured," she said finally. "We have our roles, our duties. Everything has its place, and we make sure things are in balance." Enzo nodded slowly, listening intently. "Sounds pretty different from humans. We don't have a place for everyone exactly. We just sort of find our place, you know. Everyone's got something they're passionate about, something they want to do." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "But isn't that chaotic? Isn't there conflict when people don't follow the same path?" Enzo smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Sure, there's conflict. But that's part of the fun, right? Conflict leads to growth. We push each other to do better, to think bigger." Lyra thought about that for a long time after their conversation. The Kithians were always looking for balance, for peace. But what Enzo described was something different, something more dynamic. It was as if the chaos, the mistakes, and the challenges were all part of what made humans human. They didn't seek perfection, but they always sought improvement. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra found herself more and more fascinated by the humans. She had originally come to study them, to find out what made them tick. But now, she was starting to understand them in ways she hadn't expected. She saw the way they overcame obstacles, how they refused to give up even when things seemed impossible. One evening, as they worked together in the engineering bay, Lyra asked Enzo a question that had been on her mind for some time. "Enzo, why do you work so hard?" she asked. "Why do you keep pushing yourself even when things are difficult? Most species would give up, but you humans, you don't stop." Enzo paused for a moment, looking at her as if he had never really thought about it before. Then he shrugged. "I guess it's because we can keep going. We don't have the luxury of quitting. If we stop, we fail, and that's just not an option for us." Lyra nodded slowly. There it was again, the relentless drive that seemed to define humanity. They didn't stop even when the odds were stacked against them. They didn't let failure define them. They used it as fuel to push forward. It was a lesson Lyra hadn't expected to learn. But in the presence of Enzo, and in the larger presence of humanity, she began to see what her people had missed. True strength wasn't about being perfect or never failing. It was about continuing to move forward, no matter what. And maybe, just maybe, the Kithians could learn something from that. The days on the space station seemed to pass by in a blur for Lyra. Her usual routine of quiet observation and report writing had been replaced by something much more dynamic, her growing understanding of humanity. What began as a simple assignment to study the humans had turned into something far deeper. Enzo, in his messy, unpredictable way, had shown her a side of life she had never truly considered. The more she learned, the more she realized that humans were a species of contradiction, chaotic yet resourceful, stubborn but brilliant. But now something else was happening. A threat loomed over the space station, one that was much bigger than Lyra or Enzo, or even the Kithians could have imagined. The message came in the middle of the day. The station's security alarm blared, shaking the entire structure with its deafening tone. Enzo had been working on one of his projects in the engineering bay when Lyra entered the room, her face pale with worry. "What's going on?" Enzo asked, his voice low as he set down his tools. "They've arrived," Lyra said, her eyes wide. "The alien fleet." Lyra had heard rumors of an enemy fleet, a powerful and hostile race known as the Ragai, but she never imagined they would actually come. The Ragai were a warlike species, notorious for their brutal tactics. They had already attacked several peaceful colonies, and the space station was the next target. Enzo stood frozen for a moment, his eyes scanning Lyra's face. Then, with a quick nod, he grabbed his tool and rushed toward the communication console. Lyra followed close behind, her mind racing. "We've been under attack for hours," the station's commander said over the comm. "We need every engineer we can get. There's a critical breach in the defense systems. Enzo, you're up." Lyra looked at Enzo, who was already pulling up the schematics of the station's defense systems on his screen. Despite the gravity of the situation, there was a calmness in his actions, a steadiness that Lyra hadn't seen before. "You're not going to back down, are you?" Lyra asked quietly, her voice filled with admiration. Enzo glanced at her, his eyes focused. "Nope. This is what we do. We fix things." In the face of the enemy, that's exactly what the humans did. They fixed things. They didn't panic. They didn't hesitate. They simply found solutions. As Lyra watched Enzo work, her respect for him grew even more. His hands moved quickly but carefully, adjusting components and rerouting power through the station's emergency channels. He wasn't an officer or a soldier, but he was just as important. Without engineers like him, the station would be helpless. And it was in that moment that Lyra realized something. Humans didn't just survive in the galaxy, they thrived because they were problem solvers. Hours passed, and the station's crew worked tirelessly to fend off the Ragai attack. The enemy fleet had started to bombard the station's outer defenses, and things were looking grim. But the humans, led by Enzo and his fellow engineers, refused to give up. In the midst of the chaos, Lyra found herself helping in ways she hadn't imagined. She was a diplomat, not a technician, but Enzo had shown her that even a little knowledge could go a long way. With his guidance, Lyra found herself working alongside him, fixing damaged circuits, recalibrating power systems, and rerouting communication signals to keep the station's defense grid online. She had never been so involved in such technical work, but Enzo's confidence was contagious. "Good job, Lyra," he said as they managed to stabilize one of the main defense relays. "You're a natural." Lyra gave a small smile. She wasn't sure about being a natural, but she had never felt so alive. In this moment, with the hum of the station's systems around her and the pressure of the attack looming over them, she realized that humans didn't just rely on their advanced technology. They relied on their resourcefulness, their ingenuity, and most importantly, their ability to work together. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about trying, failing, and trying again until something worked. But the battle wasn't over. The Ragai fleet had launched a final assault, one that would overwhelm the station's defenses if they didn't act quickly. Enzo turned to Lyra, his face determined. "We need to get to the main reactor. It's the last line of defense. We can't let them breach it." Lyra nodded. "I'm with you." The two of them raced through the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the tense silence. They passed other crew members, all working hard to hold off the enemy. Some were injured, others exhausted, but all of them were still pushing forward, refusing to back down. The human spirit was something that could not be easily broken. As they reached the reactor room, they found a group of engineers struggling to stabilize the system. One of the main conduits had been damaged, and without it, the entire station would lose power. The Ragai would win. Enzo quickly assessed the situation. "We need to reroute the power. We can't fix the conduit in time, but if we bypass it, we can buy ourselves some time." Lyra looked at him, impressed once again by his calmness under pressure. She had no idea how to help, but she trusted Enzo. Without him, the station wouldn't have a chance. Together, they worked with the other engineers, rerouting the power and reprogramming the systems to keep the station's shields up. It was a risky move, and it was all on the line. But Enzo's faith in his team and in himself was unshakable. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the station's systems stabilized. The shields were holding. The Ragai fleet had been repelled, at least for now. The attack was over. Exhausted but triumphant, Lyra turned to Enzo, who had collapsed into a chair, breathing heavily. His shirt was smeared with grease and sweat, but his eyes were bright. "We did it," Lyra said, barely believing the words as they left her mouth. Enzo smiled. "Yeah, we did." Lyra looked around the reactor room, taking in the faces of the engineers and crew members who had worked so hard. It was a team effort, and it was the human spirit, more than anything, that had won the day. They had fought not with strength or weapons, but with their minds, their creativity, and their unbreakable will to survive. "I didn't think humans had it in them," Lyra admitted quietly. "You're not like other species. You fight differently." Enzo chuckled, rubbing his forehead. "We don't fight for the sake of fighting. We fight to survive. And when we work together, we can do anything." Lyra stood still for a moment, letting those words sink in. It was something she had never truly understood before, but now, standing in the aftermath of the battle, she could see it clearly. Humanity wasn't about advanced weapons or technology. It was about a relentless determination, a refusal to quit, even when the odds were impossible. "Thank you, Enzo," she said softly. Enzo looked at her and shrugged. "Don't mention it. We're all in this together." As the station began to recover from the attack, Lyra knew one thing for sure. She had learned something important. The Kithians had always believed in order and perfection, but now she knew that sometimes it was the imperfections that made a species truly strong. It was the ability to fall, to fail, and then to get up and try again that made humans so remarkable. And as the crew celebrated their victory, Lyra couldn't help but smile. She had come here to observe, but now she felt like she was part of something much bigger, something she would never forget. The aftermath of the Rogai attack left the station in a state of quiet recovery. The alarms had stopped ringing, the emergency lights dimmed, and the crew had begun the long process of repairing the damage. The human engineers, led by Enzo, had worked tirelessly to ensure that the station's systems remained operational. There were still many challenges ahead, but for the moment, peace had returned to the station. The Rogai fleet had retreated, their assault repelled by the bravery and resourcefulness of the station's inhabitants. Lyra stood at the observation window in the station's main hall, looking out into the vastness of space. She had spent much of the last few days reflecting on the events that had unfolded. It had been a harrowing experience, and yet it had also been a revelation. The humans had proven themselves in ways that Lyra had never imagined. Their resilience, their creativity, and their unyielding determination had made all the difference. Enzo had become a hero among the crew, but he seemed unaffected by the praise. To him, it had been just another day of work, another challenge to solve. Lyra admired that humility. It was a trait that she hadn't expected to find in humans. They were so different from the Kithians in that respect. Her people were proud of their achievements, often placing themselves above others. But the humans, at least those like Enzo, didn't seek glory. They simply did what needed to be done, and that was enough. Enzo walked into the observation room, his footsteps quiet but purposeful. He had a small smile on his face, though it was clear that he, too, was exhausted from the recent events. "Hey, Lyra," he said, leaning against the window. "You okay?" Lyra turned to him, offering a small smile. "I'm fine, just thinking about everything that happened." "It's hard to believe it's over," Enzo nodded. "Yeah, it's crazy how fast it all happened, but we made it through, that's what matters." "Made it through," Lyra repeated softly, her eyes drifting back to the stars outside. "I never thought I'd see humans come together like that." You're different from what I imagined." Enzo raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. "How so?" Lyra paused, choosing her words carefully. "I came here expecting to find a species that was unpredictable, chaotic. And you are chaotic in a way, but you're also resilient. You don't give up no matter the odds. It's not something I thought I would find in humans." Enzo looked at her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Well, we don't give up because we know we don't have a choice. If we stop trying, we lose. But if we keep going, we win." "It's simple, really," Lyra smiled. "It's not always that simple, though, is it?" Enzo shrugged. "Maybe not, but that's how we work. We keep trying until something works. It's what we do." Lyra nodded, turning back to the window. The stars were beautiful, a peaceful reminder of how small and fragile everything was in the grand scheme of the universe. "I think I understand now. You humans don't need perfection. You don't need everything to go according to plan. You just need the will to keep going. And that's what makes you strong." Enzo didn't respond right away. He simply stood there staring out into space with her. It was a quiet moment, one that felt more like a shared understanding than a conversation. After a while, he spoke again. "You know, I never thought much about what other species think of us," he said. "But I get what you mean. We don't have all the answers, but we've learned to find a way, even if it's messy. Sometimes it's the mistakes that teach us the most." Lyra chuckled softly. "I can see that. You've certainly taught me a lot." Enzo smiled, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "Well, I'm glad I could be of help." The two of them stood in silence for a few moments longer, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Lyra spoke again, her voice quieter than before. "Do you ever wonder what the future holds for humans?" she asked. "You've been through so much. The Rogai attack was just the beginning. There will be more challenges ahead." Enzo sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've thought about it. Honestly, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. We'll face whatever comes just like we always do, together." Lyra turned to him, her eyes searching his face. There was something in his words, something that resonated deeply with her. Humans didn't look at the future with fear or uncertainty. They looked at it with hope and determination. They didn't have all the answers, but they trusted each other. And that, Lyra realized, was the key to their strength. "You're right," she said quietly. "You face everything together, and that's what makes you unique." Enzo shrugged again, looking a little embarrassed by the praise. "It's nothing special. We're just humans doing what we do." But Lyra saw the truth in his words. It was special. In a galaxy full of powerful species with advanced technologies, the humans had something that couldn't be measured by science or technology. They had the strength of spirit, the will to fight, to survive, and to always move forward. As the days passed, the station slowly returned to normal. The repairs continued, and life went on. But Lyra's perspective had shifted. She had come to study the humans, to understand them in a way that her people never could. But now she realized that she had learned something far more important. She had learned that true strength wasn't just about technology or military power. It was about the will to keep going, no matter what. The Kithians had always believed in order and perfection, but Lyra had seen firsthand that sometimes it was the imperfections that made a species strong. The mistakes, the failures, the chaos, it was all part of the process. And in the end, it was the humans' ability to adapt, to grow, and to never give up that made them truly exceptional. As Lyra prepared to leave the station and return to her people, she couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. She had come here to observe, to report, and to return with data. But what she took back with her wasn't just information about human behavior. It was a deeper understanding of what it meant to be alive, to struggle, and to thrive. Before she left, Enzo came to see her. The station had returned to its usual routine, but there was still a sense of gratitude in the air. The crew had worked together to protect their home, and now they were moving forward. "Well," Enzo said, "I guess this is it. I'll miss our talks." Lyra smiled. "I will, too. You've shown me more than I could have ever imagined." Enzo chuckled. "I'm glad I could help. You're always welcome to visit, you know." Lyra nodded. "Maybe I will. I've learned a lot from humans, and I think there's still more for me to learn." With that, Lyra turned and walked toward the airlock, ready to return to her people. But as she left, she knew one thing for sure. She would never forget the lessons she had learned from humans. Their strength, their spirit, and their ability to face the unknown with unwavering resolve had changed her forever. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would share what she had learned with her people. The Kithians had always believed in perfection, but now Lyra understood that sometimes it was the imperfections that truly made a species strong.